Hey, hello, everybody. Where the hell am I? Oh, here I am. Hello there. My name is Sydney Winston. I am also known as Ask an Atheist.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, good. Look, it's like the audio's all working and everything. I am also known as Ask an Atheist. So what? You say, you might say, you are saying, probably. Well, you're right, doesn't matter. However, I got a question. How many of you understand what the Balfour Declaration is, what the historical significance of it is, and how it came to be an issue of contention? I am going to defer to the Jerusalem Center for all the details, but as I understand it, 1917, the United Kingdom defeats the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire cedes all its territory over to the Allies. The territory in the Middle East is chopped up into three different mandates. The mandate for Iraq, or the mandate for Mesopotamia, which is given to Britain, to Great Britain. Then there's the mandate for Syria and Lebanon, which is given to the French. And then there's the mandate for Palestine, which is given to the British. Lord Balfour, a member of the government, as exactly all the details will get from the videos or from the lectures. Lord Balfour is the guy who basically wrote the declaration to the Jewish people, promising them that Palestine is recognized as a homeland for the Jewish people. The actual territory of Palestine is massive. It includes all of modern-day Israel, from the Jordan River west all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Includes the Golan Heights, and includes the territory of Transjordan, which was renamed Jordan, which was renamed Transjordan in 1922 or 23. Again, I'm not quite sure yet, but I have all the graphics. I have the slides. So when that happened, Palestine, which is massive, which was designated for Jewish immigration, has been whittled down through Arab aggression and revolting revolution over time, to the point where we all understand now what the Palestinians, what the Arabs really want. And what the Arabs really want, for no rational reason, is all of Israel, all of the state of Israel for their own state of Arab Palestine, which of course is ridiculous. Because I just want to point out one thing: when Transjordan was given to the Arabs for Arab immigration only, and Palestine, which is we call the territory to the west of the Jordan River, was given over for Jewish immigration, according to the San Remo Conference of 1920 to 1922. I do believe, again, hopefully these details will come out in the talk we're about to watch, because I haven't watched it yet. The Arabs would not allow the territory of Palestine ceded for Jewish immigration, which was everything between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Would not allow it. There were riots. There were killings, massacres. The Arabs didn't want the Jews around, or some of them didn't want the Jews around. There weren't very many of them, but it seems that there was a fear of Jewish immigration, and for no reason, for no apparent reason. So what? I mean, they got all this land of Palestine, you know, for themselves. Crazy, yeah, absolutely crazy. I will look for the slides actually while the talk is on, and see if there's some space to introduce them, to give you some idea of what I'm talking about. So let me yeah, right, let me get back on track here and get back to there we go. So what I'll do is I'm going to slide this this in here. That's the beginning of the first talk. They're not very long. They're not very many of them either. So what I'm figuring is to just sort of get going and get listening. And if I can find them, there we go. All right, so here goes talk number 1. And I'll just either shut up or interject as needed.
The Balfour Declaration is an extremely important event historically. It was a very noble act of not of one man, not of just Lord Balfour, but of the British War Cabinet. You have to remember that in 1917, Britain did not occupy most of what was known biblically as Palestine, did not have title to give to the Jewish people, to the Arabs, to anybody. So we have to look at the Balfour Declaration as a very important event politically. It certainly helped the Zionist movement move forward with its aims to establish a Jewish home in the Holy Land. What happens next is the Paris Peace Conference, the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. That's after the end of the war, where the Allies, more importantly 5 nations, the principal powers, are receiving submissions from the Jewish people and from the Arabs. The Arabs on February 6, 1919, the Jews on February 27. During these very important sessions with the principal powers, that is the US, the UK, Italy, France, and Japan, the Arabs asked for independence for Arab territories that were under the Ottomans for centuries. The Jewish people asked for the recognition of their historical connection with Palestine, the right to reconstitute there what they used to have. They asked for the recognition of the Jewish people as a person in international law, as a people in international law. They asked for the creation of a mandatory, or the establishment of a mandate in respect to Palestine, because they weren't quite ready yet to establish a state, because the population was small compared to the Arab population. And so they urged the principal powers to set up a mandate in their favor. Following the presentations in Paris, we go to San Remo, Italy in April of 1920, where these powers gather for several days to deliberate, to make decisions. What are we going to do about the Arab claims? What are we going to do about the Jewish claims? And on April 25, 1920, the decisions are made. They say yes to the Jewish people. We'll recognize your historical connection. We will establish a national home for the Jews in a territory called Palestine. And these deliberations result in a decision which, in my opinion, are binding international law, then picked up and put into the Treaty of Sèvres in August of 1920, which completely transfers all the title to the principal power so that they can turn around and give the rights to the Jewish people and to the Arabs. Then followed by the Mandate for Palestine, an international treaty where the very thing the Jews asked for in Paris, the recognition of their historical connection and the right to reconstitute, is granted. And the policy of the Balfour Declaration is injected, incorporated into the mandate. Article 2 of the Mandate for Palestine becomes part of international law.
There's another one. It's a playlist, so have patience.
Arthur Balfour had many motivations for his declaration. It was a multi-causal phenomenon. The first was his idealism. He was a Zionist. He, from his earliest days, believed in the concept of a national homeland for the Jews. He was somebody who read his Bible, who knew it back to front, highly intelligent man and a philosopher and a friend to the Jews. So that was the first one. But of course that would never have been anything other than a vague aspiration of the British government if it hadn't been for the First World War. And we were not doing well, we as the British were not doing well in that period between June and November 1917, between the first part of the discussions over the declaration in the British cabinet and the actual declaration on the 2nd of November. The Battle of Passchendaele had been an incredibly bloody slaughter, and basically nobody had won. There was real danger that in Russia, the February Revolution and then the one that's called the October Revolution, that actually broke out in November, was going to destabilize the whole of Russia and maybe create a situation where dozens of divisions were going to be able to be moved by the Germans from the Eastern Front onto the Western Front. And it was hoped that if we made a major declaration in favour of a national homeland for the Jews, then Jews across Europe and also in America might look more positively towards the whole of the Allied cause, really. You also had a great debate within Cabinet about whether or not the Jews were going to be able to turn this arid land in the Levant into something that was going to thrive and prosper. And Lord Curzon didn't think that was going to be possible, and in fact, one of the few Jewish members of the Cabinet, Herbert Samuel, didn't either. But the real belief that the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, and the Munitions Secretary, Winston Churchill, who of course also was Zionists, had was, along with Arthur Balfour, that in fact enormous amounts of Jewish capital and intelligence and know-how, and individuals of course, was going to flood in to the Holy Land and actually make it a viable state. They didn't give a time reference for this. The declaration itself is notoriously vague, of course, as regards borders are not mentioned, for example, and the actual form of government isn't even mentioned at all. But everybody, apart from Herbert Samuel and Lord Curzon in that cabinet, believed that it was going to be a good thing for the British to actually make a bold statement. And of course, at that stage, they didn't really care what the Palestinian Arabs thought, because they were on the other side. They were the enemy. And so there was a right of conquest concept as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. Arabs as conquered in Palestine. Good point. Remember that for discussions. There's 6 of these, by the way. This is number 3.
The fighting in Europe and in the Middle East during the First World War was a major influence on the British government's decision to make the Balfour Declaration, because what they wanted to do was to try and ensure that the Jewish community in the United States, in Britain, in Russia, and other countries remained on side and supported the British war effort. The other thing we shouldn't forget as well is that Mr. Weitzman was extremely useful to Great Britain in the work he did on developing synthetic explosives. And that, I think, was significantly relevant to the decision to make the declaration. But David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister at the time, himself was a very committed Zionist. He felt a lot of similarities between the Jews in Palestine and the Welsh in Wales, and not only from the sort of geographical perspective, with both places about the same size, but also he was a deeply religious man who understood the Old Testament extremely well. But also at the time, in Palestine, the Jews were being very, very helpful in the war effort. And Nili, for example, the intelligence organization based in Palestine, provided a huge amount of assistance to General Allenby's forces. And without them, undoubtedly the campaign would have taken far more casualties than it did. And potentially the battle in Gaza and other battles around Palestine at the time would not have gone ahead as effectively as they actually did. So I think the contribution being made by those Jews and others in Palestine was extremely significant. That was acknowledged by the Chief of British Intelligence after the war.
Good stuff, huh? Ooh, this should be interesting.
You asked me about the legal standing of the Balfour Declaration. I think today it is not of any legal status because it has been replaced by the Covenant of the League of Nations, which really repaired all the legal questions that remained with regard to the Balfour Declaration. Because the Balfour Declaration, from the legal point of view, you have the question, is it a binding declaration? Could England make such a declaration before it was actually in control of Palestine? What is a national home? What is Palestine? What does it mean in Palestine? All these are questions that remain open, but we were lucky to hear the interpretation of Churchill in the Peel Commission, where he really said that it really meant a state and it really meant in the whole of Palestine.
See? The whole of Palestine, and I'm going to get to that. The whole of Palestine, that's a very important phrase. Where are we at? Number 5.
As an international lawyer, I'm being asked constantly, how come a 100-year-old document written by the British Foreign Secretary and sent to the leadership of the Jewish community in Palestine, promising a Jewish national home, how could this be a legally binding, authoritative instrument which has ultimately become so important both in the Middle East peace process, but also in the history of the State of Israel? And my answer is this, that according to international law and practice, any unilateral declaration issued properly by a foreign minister, an authorized representative of a state, is binding on that state, and as soon as such a declaration is accepted by other states and is included into an international treaty, then it is binding on all those states party to the international treaty. This was the situation with the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was in itself not a legal document. It was a letter But this letter was an official declaration by the state of Britain, and as such it was binding on the state of Britain. It afterwards was incorporated word for word in part of the peace conferences that came about as a result of the end of the First World War, the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. It was incorporated into these declarations and treaties. Afterwards, it was incorporated into the League of Nations mandate that was granted by the League to Britain, and as such, it became an international treaty and it became a legally binding document. And this was followed by, once the League of Nations was dissolved, the United Nations, when it was established in 1945, determined in Article 80 of the UN Charter a clause which is commonly known as the Palestine Clause, that assured that all rights and obligations towards states and peoples given before the creation of the United Nations will remain in force. So all these things point to a very clear fact. The Balfour Declaration is a binding document, that the promise of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, in the land of Israel, is a binding document and has been acknowledged and accepted as part of international law and remains so to this very day.
Ooh, interesting. One more. Can you handle it? Can you sit through one more? Oh, I should start looking for those. Excuse me while I look for the.
Of course, the Balfour Declaration was many things to many people. Today, it's customary to look at it as though Britain was seeking to gain politically. It was hoping that the Jews would provide support in America, in Russia, for the British war efforts. Looking back, it looks like the British might have got it wrong on two levels. First, it wasn't clear that the Jews had the kind of support that they were hoping to find from them. And secondly, it was by no means clear that support for Zionism at that stage was the way to the heart of the Jewish community, because there was such strong opposition from people who feared that this would lose them the rights that they had fought so hard to obtain if they were regarded as being part of a people whose homeland was elsewhere. But I think it's also, as you said, it was not just a remarkable constellation of events, it was a remarkable constellation of people. And when you dig back into the history, you find people, some of them rather extraordinary individuals. Lord Rothschild, who was primarily an animal collector, a zoologist, whose most passionate conversation with Chaim Weizmann was to ask him to chase up 2 ostriches which he had sent to Palestine, and nobody knew what happened to them. Really a remarkable group of people, and I think one of the lessons that we can draw is that each of us in our own way can find our own way, however strange and unusual we might be, to play our role in the story of Israel and the Zionist story.
All right. Okay, so I did find the PowerPoint. Thank you, Jerusalem Center. You are very, very good. So I found the PowerPoint. Now, of course, I've got to go and look for the actual slide that I need. Yeah, I think I got them. Okay, I found them. Let's see if I can get my stuff together. Oh, there we go. Good. All right, so let me just cut this right in here. Make it a bit bigger before I do that. Sorry. Alright, so here's Palestine, okay, in white. That's the huge area of Palestine. That is the area referred to in the Balfour Declaration. Okay? In 1920, the Balfour Declaration was essentially something that was written either just before, I think just before the Ottoman Empire actually fell, but it was inevitable. Regardless, the Balfour Declaration refers to a Jewish national home to be reconstituted within the boundaries of the mandate for Palestine, which, as you can see, is white, all in white, huge place. Because of Arab insurrection and hatred for Jews and just plain Arab ignorance, in 1920 there was a conference in a place called San Remo. Not quite sure where it is, Italy or somewhere, Spain, God knows where. And they 2 years later acceded to the Arabs and said, all right then, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll tell you what we'll, whoops, we're not going to do that. What we'll do is we'll take all of that white, we'll chop 77% of that area off, which is everything to the right of or to east of the Jordan River, not including the Golan Heights, and that'll be Palestine. How's that? There's Palestine, Arab Palestine, Jewish Palestine on the left there with a little bit of white space, including the Golan Heights, and there you go. That's Palestine according to the San Remo conference in July 24th, 1922. That, my friends, is already a travesty. You go from that, which was essentially today should be Israel, all of that should be Israel. And then we went to that, to Transjordan, which is okay. So we got Transjordan, right? Great. Why then? Well, firstly, Amman, the city of Amman, was named as capital of Transjordan. Amman. Oh my goodness, look at this stuff. Look at this. Alright, I just wanted to get to this one here. This was the partition plan of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Everything in purple was Arab, and everything in orange was Jewish. The blue bit in the center there was international. The Arabs rejected that partition plan, which would have been your two-state solution right there in 1947. Two-state solution implemented. Thank you very much, Arabs and Jews. Oh, Arabs, you didn't want it, did you? You hate us. You hate the Jews. So they rejected it. Then, this is what I want to say. Okay, this is the one I want to bring to your attention. There was a war, a couple of wars, but in 1949, there was an armistice, the First War. Jordan owned all that land east of the Jordan River in green. All of that was in green. Now remember, the capital of Jordan is Amman. The Jordanians controlled Jerusalem, especially the important bits of Jerusalem, the contentious bits. I posit to you right now that it was a big mistake of Jordan to not declare Jerusalem the capital of Jordan and then just change Jordan to Palestine. Done. They would have owned all of Jordan plus the West Bank. Plus Gaza City, because that was in Egyptian hands in 1949 at the armistice. So if Jordan had declared Jerusalem as the capital of Jordan and changed its name to Palestine, good, we got a solution, no problem. There's your Palestine right there, it's huge. But they didn't. They just didn't. Why didn't they? Because they're idiots. They never thought about it. There was no Palestine. There was no Jerusalem as capital of Arab Palestine. They're full of it. The Arabs are full of it. Now, it's essentially what I wanted to bring to you today. That was it. Okay? I didn't want to bring anything else that... I hadn't anything... I hadn't... Excuse me. I don't have anything else lined up. So this is where we are going to leave you. I want to, as usual, thank you so much for watching. I do hope you click the donate button and throw a few pennies into the box. And until we meet again, we will be as ever. Proud to present another production by Sidney Winston.